So welcome everybody to this webinar. We are really pleased to have some of you attending to it. So we'll present today the ACT initiative, Assessing Low Carbon Transition. And this webinar is dedicated to the chemicals methodology development and the road test phase that is about to come. Alice, have you seen the slide change?
Yes, all good.
Yeah, okay, so it's working. So welcome again. We will present this today with Alice De Palma from the CDP and myself, Yann Rossetti from ADEM. So we are the two presenters of the presentation today. A quick overview of the agenda. We'll have a few words to introduce the ACT initiative, since you are not all really familiar with it. Then we'll focus a bit more on the chemicals methodology, that is the one of interest for you, and some of the key elements. And then we'll have an in-depth look on the public consultation and the road test phases of the projects that are about to come, and during which we would like companies to help us and bring some feedback, and the next steps of the chemical methodology development. Just before we go a bit further in the presentation, do not hesitate to interrupt if you have any questions, if you want to write it in the Q&A section in the chat, or just ask whenever it's needed.
Yeah, and just so you know, everyone's muted, so I think it's better if people write their questions down, and then we can go through them.
Okay.
But yeah, I can unmute people if needed. So if anyone would rather like speak up, I can do that as well.
Okay, so please let us know if needed. Thanks, Alice. So about the ACT initiative, ACT is a global voluntary initiative that was co-funded by CDP and ADEM a few years ago in 2015. And we benefit from some financial support of the EIT Climate Kick community. And the objective of ACT is to provide an accountability framework by assessing how a company's strategy and actions contribute to meeting the Paris Agreement mitigation goal. So aiming to stay on a well below 2 degrees warming trajectory. And a bit more in details about the ACT assessments. We'll see that the company analysis is made against qualitative and quantitative indicators. We'll have a few words about this. We are also using sector-specific indicators. And the ACT rating is giving an overview of the readiness of companies to decarbonize their activities. So the final output of the ACT assessment is a feedback report for the companies with tailored recommendations depending on the rating they just obtained. So this is an image we are a bit used to present, maybe to locate the ACT initiative amongst other ones. So if the Paris Agreement's mitigation goal was a marathon, we could consider 4 different steps. The first one would be to follow the TCFD recommendation. So that would mean that an individual considers the advantages of running the marathon alongside the risks and level of commitment required. Then the second step would be to report to CDP, which would be equivalent to share current track record and performance in running. Then a step further would be to set a science-based target, for instance, thanks to the Science-Based Target Initiative. So that would be equivalent to set a goal to complete the marathon in a suitable time. And ACT would be the 4th step, the last one. And it would be equivalent to determine whether the training program in the lead up to the marathon is rigorous enough and which will help achieve the goal. So this is a bit useful to locate the ACT initiative because we often have a few questions about how it is related, for instance, to the science-based target initiatives. So how ACT can help you? It provides to companies an accountability mechanism to help them achieve their climate commitments. Here is a presentation of all the sectors that are covered or will be covered by ACT. So there was a work to identify the highest emitting sectors at the beginning. And then every sector is covered thanks to a proper methodology. So we already cover 8 sectors that you can see on the left. Auto manufacturers, electric utilities, retail, and so on. So these methods are already available for users on the ACT website. Then we have 3 sectors that are still in the road test phase of the project. So iron and steel, agri-food and agriculture, and the generic method, which is dedicated to companies that are not covered by all the other sectoral methodologies. So we expect that these sectors will be covered at the end of the year. And then the 4 final methodologies that are about to come: glass, chemicals, pulp and paper, and aluminium. So we are still under the methodological development for a few weeks, and the road test phase will start a bit later on September. So the ACT methodologies are sector specific, as we just introduced, and include the context and levels of each sector to allow really properly dedicated assessment for all companies. This is the ACT rating system. So you can see that it's divided into 3 parts. The first one in red is the performance score. So it is divided in 9 different modules. The 1 targets, number 2 material investments, and so on until module number 9 business model. So this gives us a score which will be presented as a number ranking from 1 to 20, and it corresponds to a measure of the alignment of the company with all the low carbon key performance indicators that are designed in each ACT methodology. The second part of the ACT rating will be the narrative score, taking into account 4 different categories of information: business model and strategy, consistency and credibility, reputation and risk. So this narrative score will be presented as a letter ranking from E to A, and it gives us a holistic summary of the assessment based on all the data that was collected and so provided by the companies. And the third part of the ACT rating is the trend score, which can be a sign, so minus, equal, or plus, and taking into account the change in future emissions, the change in the business model and strategy, and any other information compiled as part of score research, we will try to determine if the ACT assessment done in the near future will give to the company a better, an equal, or a worse score compared to the current one. So we have 3 different parts in the ACT rating, which allow really high level of detail for feedback at the end of the assessment. So maybe we can take a few questions now, if any, and if not, we'll go to the second part of the presentation, which is related to the key elements that were identified for setting up the chemicals methodology. I'm not sure there is at least there is nothing in the Q&A section so far.
No, I can't see any questions, but if you do have any, you can still put them in there and we can come back to it as well.
Okay. So I'll move on, and please do not hesitate if you have any question on what was presented before. So about the chemicals methodology, here are the key considerations. First of all, we had, of course, a time constraint to create a streamlined methodology, because as we will see, the chemical sector is quite complex and diverse. So it was not that easy, of course, to design a methodology that is suitable for all the companies that are related to the sector. We tried to identify the most relevant low carbon pathways for all types of companies and products that are related to the chemical sector. And here are 3 examples of key elements that were taken into account really specifically for the chemical sector. The investment in the CCUS technologies, the energy efficiency and the management, and the use of recycled inputs and bio-based feedstock. So we'll see a bit later on how such parameters can be assessed within the ACT methodology. One work we had to deal with, was to define which type of companies can be assessed by the ACT chemical methodology. So of course we wanted to cover as many types of companies as possible, and the challenge of the chemical sector is that we have a really big variety of the products and processes that are to be covered, and the quite also heterogeneous levels of emissions intensity and absolute emissions. So we define different types of companies. The first one is a type A, which correspond to companies exclusively focusing on the production of primary chemicals, which are the following ones: ammonia, methanol, what we call the high-value chemicals, so ethylene, propylene, and the aromatics compounds, the BTX, and the 2 other ones, chlorine and hydrogen. So these type A companies are located in the upstream part of the value chain of the chemical sector. Then we defined the type B companies, which are the ones that do not produce any of the primary chemicals listed above. So they are this time located in the downstream part of the value chain. And of course, we are also considering the integrated companies, which are the ones producing both primary chemicals and other chemicals. So their activities are located into the both upstream and downstream part of the value chain. So as we'll see a bit later, the assessment is tailored to the type of company and the type of production to provide relevant feedback, because we cannot assess in the exact same way all these companies that are quite different and their activities. Here is a presentation of the low carbon scenarios or pathways that we are considering. So we just saw the 2 different types of companies. If we first have a look on the primary chemicals producers, so the type A companies, we took into consideration 3 different sources for decarbonization scenario. So both the energy technology perspective and the future of hydrogen reports from the EIA, and also the information that is available in the European Green Taxonomy, and the allocation method that was used to go from a sectoral scenario to a company level pathway is the SDA, the Sectoral Decarbonization Approach, that you may know, and that was designed by the Science Based Targets Initiative in 2015. So you can see examples of the intensity pathways that we are considering for some calculation in the ACT chemicals methodology, with the examples of the ammonia in red, the methanol in purple, and the high-value chemicals in yellow. So you can see the evolution that is expected on the emissions intensity for the production of these primary chemicals a long time. Then for the other companies, so type B, we used as a source for decarbonization scenario a global scenario, because it was not possible to cover all companies and all activities thanks to such sectoral scenarios we just presented before. And the allocation method that is used to go down to the company level pathway is the absolute contraction approach, ACA, that was also designed by the Science Based Target Initiative a bit later than the SDA that we just introduced previously. So ACT looks beyond target setting and assesses past, current, and future emissions performance against the well below 2 degrees scenario. Here we present a bit more in detail the ACT modules, so the 9 modules that are part. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we just got a questions on the scenarios, so I thought maybe you might want to answer it now.
Yeah, we can try, sorry.
I can read it out. So the question says, the SDA for chemicals is currently under development at the SBT. Are you referring to another scenario when assessing company targets?
Yeah, so far, as we just said, we are mainly using the data from the International Energy Agency. So, for instance, with the 2 reports that are presented here, the ETP 2020, the most recent one, and the future of hydrogen. So this we were able to plot our own SDA for the primary chemicals we just listed in this slide. So from ammonia to hydrogen. And for the type B companies, it was not possible for us to plot such SDA curves. This is why so far we choose to consider another allocation method to go down to the company level pathway, so using the absolute contraction approach. We try to identify the most relevant and up-to-date scenarios that enabled us to plot SDA curves for the sector. I hope
maybe I can
answer the question, and please do not hesitate to.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add one thing very quickly, which is that the sectoral decarbonization approach from the Science Based Targets Initiative is just the approach of the way that we, as Jan explained, go from the global scenario to the company level pathway. So it's just that approach that we're using. The scenarios itself are not the SBT, well, not the scenarios selected by the SBT, but the ones that Jan just presented. So just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. Might be clearer now. So let's go back to the ACT modules. So these are the modules that are part of the ACT performance rating. And you see that you have two types, let's say, of modules, the quantitative one, so modules 1 to 4, and the qualitative ones from 5 to 9. So each of these modules are taking into account different parameters that are relevant to build the performance assessment. So the first one is taking a look at the emissions reduction targets of the company, including time horizon, if any, that is defined. The module number 2, material investment, is considering the emissions from current and planned assets and the processes. So it relates to the direct emissions falling into the scope of the company. The module number 3, intangible investment, is related to the investment in R&D and low carbon technologies. Module 4, sole product performance, we are looking at the emissions of product in overall value chain. So this is this time the indirect emissions that are assessed. Module number 5 relates to the management incentives and low carbon transition plan. Module 6 and 7, the engagement with suppliers and clients, respectively. Module number 8, the policy engagement, so the engagement with trade associations and climate policies at different, let's say, geographical levels, so national or international. And the module number 9, business models, so the development of viable low carbon business models that are relevant for the sector that is considered. So this is really the construction of the ACT performance scoring, and it's common to all ACT methodologies that are designed. A bit more specifically for the chemical sector, so we see that we have a few key elements that we're taking into account, and there are different ways of assessing them. So, for instance, the investment in CCUS technologies, the methodology will have a look on the R&D and CapEx investments, as well as any business model related to such technologies. So we are using both quantitative and qualitative assessments. The energy efficiency and management is assessed thanks to the reduction of the energy consumption, as well as the use of the low carbon energy. So this time we are only considering qualitative assessment. The use of recycled inputs and bio-based feedstock, with the share of all types of feedstock and any business model again related to such parameters. So both quantitative and qualitative way of assessment. And an internal carbon pricing that is quite new for us in the ACT methodologies. So we try to see how it is it considered at the very beginning, sorry, how has it been defined, and is there any monitoring process to review its value over time. So again, we are using a qualitative assessment. And when we are talking about qualitative assessment, we are mainly using maturity matrices, defining different levels from really basic one to a low carbon aligned state, depending on the elements that the company is showing and providing. So the main mitigation levels of the sector are considered and assessed again the most ambitious benchmark available, as we saw before. Before I move on, I see there is a question. How would you consider the net zero initiative of Carbon 4 here? At what stage would it be useful? I'm not really familiar with the construction of the net zero initiative, but we are not using it at all when considering the ACT assessment. So I'm not really sure how we can link the two methodologies. Alice, maybe you know this one a bit more than me.
No, not necessarily. I haven't heard of it either. I wonder if okay, so it's about the place of the net zero initiative on the slide that we've got talking about the marathon steps and where it would fit. It's kind of hard to say because we're not familiar with it, so I'm not sure where they would come into play. So if you can provide a bit more information in terms of what it is it a scenario, is it a tool, and kind of the scope of it.
I know it's a methodology coming from the consulting Carbon 4, and so the aim for the companies, if I'm not wrong, is to set a date at which they would become net zero emitters. But I'm not really sure how the method is telling companies how to proceed a long time until they reach this target, and what are the parameters that are considered. So maybe what we can say here is that in ACT we are not only looking at the final target, which could be being net zero emitter or any other one, but we are taking into account past, present, and future levels of emissions and how to say initiatives from the companies, and we are trying to see the consistency of all of it from past to future to see how the company can reach the target. Is it sufficient enough? So yeah, I'm just not sure about the net zero initiative construction. Sorry. Okay, perfect. To go back to the modules within the ACT assessment, you can see here different weightings. So each module has its own weighting, and depending for the chemical sector of the type of the company we are considering, type A, type B, or integrated, the weighting will be different, because the stakes are not located on the same, let's say, parameters. For instance, for the type A companies, the most heavily weighted module is the number 2, material investment, weighting more or less 30%, which is of course not the case for type B companies, for which we will be more focusing on the sole product performance downstream on the downstream part of the value chain, and the supplier engagement, since a high share of the emissions embedded in the products is coming from the upstream activities. So it is much more important to see and to assess the supplier engagement for the type B companies rather than the type A. This is why the weightings are changing that much. And the integrated case is a mix of the different weightings for type A and type B, depending on the share of the different activities covered by the company. So the weighting is tailored to the type of products, which explain the dynamic percentage. And yeah, depending, for instance, in the type A companies, you can see on the module number 4 that we have a weighting going from 2 to 7%, and it depends on the type of products that are covered. If it's, for instance, ammonia or ethanol or hydrogen, or a combination of different activities. That's it for this slide. I hope that was clear. Yes, so this is it for the key elements regarding the chemicals methodology. So if you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to fulfill the Q&A section. And we'll have a word now on the public consultation phase of the project, which is about to come at the end of the week. So when will it take place? From the 28th of May to the 25th of June. So really soon. And how is it happening? We ask everyone that is relevant, of course, to provide comments on the Scribe Hub platform, as you can see here on the screenshot on the right. So you can find the link to this Scribe Hub platform on the ACT website, and more specifically on the participate page. So you have the link here in the slide. And we ask all stakeholders in the sector that are interested in to participate. So please do not hesitate to share this information with your colleagues and your network if you think that anybody could be interested in. Why do we use this public consultation? To give an opportunity to stakeholders to review the methodology before its finalization and before the road test phase that is starting for us in September. So it's the pilot, during which we try to see if the ACT methodology was well built and how is it working when we are putting it into practice. So providing comments on the Scribe Hub platform is quite simple. This is how it looks like. You can see on the left the summary of the sections that are embedded into the document. And you can see with the red arrow that you can provide comments related to the section you are currently reading. So yeah, this is a really easy way for us to collect some feedback from readers. So this is how it looks like on the ScribeHub platform. Just a few words on the structure of the methodology, and more specifically on the presentation of the key performance indicators that are parts of the performance score we talked about before. The KPIs will always be presented this way. First, the title and the weighting to highlight how important the KPI is. Then a really quick description with description and requirements, and also a short description of the indicator, just to present what are we talking about, what we are talking about. Then you have two parts that are data requirements and how the assessment will be done in order for everybody to understand which data is required and how it is used to get the assessment and the rating. And at the end, the rationale of the indicator, why. So to explain why every KPI was put in the ACT methodology. The last thing, we have two versions of the ACT chemicals methodology that will be available on the ScribeHub platform. This is quite new. So you'll first find a short version, which should be around 40 pages. So this short version is dedicated to users that are not familiar yet with the ACT initiative. So in which you will find the ACT rating system and the weightings, the scope and boundaries part, a quick presentation of the low carbon scenarios, and a quick overview also of the key performance indicators. But it's really, let's say, a summary of it. And the long or the full version of the methodology, which would be more about 160 pages, will enable an in-depth reading. So you can, for instance, start with the short version, and if you have a really specific question on a part of the document, then you can refer to the long version. So sections here are more complete, and you'll find in the long version some parts that are not available in the short version. So the literature review, which gave us the key elements of the sector, some details on the emissions reduction trajectories, so more details about how the SDA curves and the ACA curves were built, the assessment, construction, and required data included in the KPIs presentation, as I just presented before, and the rationale of the weighting system from one module to another. Okay, this is it for the public consultation. So please don't hesitate if you have any question on this part. And if not, I will let Alice go on for the two next sections of the presentation.
Thanks, Jan. So we do have one question. I was just wondering if we wanted to ask Mark to say a few words before. So we've had some of the participants from our technical working group, which helped us develop the chemicals methodology. So they joined this webinar, and they kindly accepted to kind of give some comments in terms of the process and their thoughts on the methodology so far. So we thought it would be interesting for you all to hear that. So Mark, I will unmute you. So yes, that's done.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're at. I hope everybody can hear me okay. My name is Mark Winklowiak. I work with Chimera Chemicals. I'm based in the United States. We would be a type B company in the scheme of this agenda here. Just wanted to give a couple thoughts and some feedback as a member of the technical working group. I think for me, it's been very valuable to see how the methodology has not just focused on what was being what's typically described as the performance score, or just what's been measured, what your targets are. I think many companies have done those types of analyses, and even going up to the science-based target level. I think that's all great stuff and very important, and it's the foundation of what needs to be done. But I think what I've been so pleased and interested to see more about it is how this methodology has brought in what would be scored under the narrative score, which the business model side of things, and especially for me, it's been the physical risk and adaptation dimension, because I think a lot of companies are not always thinking about those types of things. We've done a great job with measuring and reporting CO2 emissions throughout the life cycle and the supply chain. But I think really we're taking it to the next level of looking at the business model, risks, adaptation, those types of elements, how it all fits into the scheme of operating a profitable business that is doing the right thing with respect to the environment, its workers, and the community around that it's involved in. I think it's great to see, and I'm really appreciative of how this methodology has incorporated those elements into the whole methodology.
Great, thank you very much, Mark.
You're welcome.
I think before moving on to the next section, so we've got a question around the ACT initiative, and well, let me read it actually. Is this ACT initiative envisaged to be used as part of CDP disclosures on climate in the future, or does it feed into the SBTI chemicals initiative under development? So I'm happy to take that one. And Jan, would you mind moving back to the slide where we show the 4 different initiatives? And thanks, I'll just, while we get to it. So CDP disclosure and ACT are 2 separate initiatives, so they will remain separate. I think if you can go 1 slide later. Yeah, perfect, thanks. Right, so 2 separate initiatives, but so CDP is about reporting, ACT is about an in-depth assessment of the company and its alignment with the Paris Agreement mitigation goal. But we align the 2 wherever possible. So we have made sure to map all of the data requirements for ACT with the CDP questionnaire. And you might have seen that in the slide that kind of shows the structure of the ACT methodology. We do have a part that says that gives you the mapping in terms of the data they require and which CDP question it refers to. So that's kind of how they're linked, and we are making sure to align both of these, so ACT and CDP, as much as possible going forward. And in terms of the SBTI chemicals initiative, so we have spoken with SBTI, and they have presented on the first meetings of the Chemicals Technical Working Group. So we've been able to kind of get the information and the expertise that they developed on the scoping phase of the SBTI chemicals. But I think there's currently a pause in the project. So we've used as much information from them as we could and tried to align wherever possible, but that's as much as we could do. So again, ACT and SBT will remain separate, but we also try to align as much as possible. Right. I hope that answers the question. If you've got any other questions on what was presented, again, feel free to put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I will just go back to the road test. So I'll just take.
So you're the presenter again, Alice. You should be able to move the slides.
Yes, I think I should be able to get that. Okay, perfect, thanks. Can you see the slides moving?
Yeah.
Great, okay, let me go back to the road test then. Right, okay, so now we've talked about the methodology, we've talked about the public consultation that's opening in a few days. And after that public consultation and after the finalization of the chemicals methodology, we'll move on to the road test phase, which is a pilot of the methodology with voluntary companies. That road test will start in September of this year and it will run for about 6 months until February. And we will have a maximum of 15 voluntary chemicals companies that will be able to take part in this process. And we will have to select a few if we do have too many candidates. And we'll try and make sure that we've got, so some of the things that we'll prioritize to select the companies that do take part are a good representation of the value chain and making sure that the group of companies is geographically diverse, just to make sure that the methodology is as global as possible and can really assess any companies within the sector. So again, it will be a pilot test of the ACT methodology. This kind of means that you get a free ACT assessment if your company does decide to participate. And what it means for us is it allows us to take the methodology from theory to application using real data from companies and really kind of test all of these indicators that Jan presented. And what happens at the end of the road test? Well, we compile all of the suggested modifications and feedback that we receive from both the ACT team and the analysts, as well as the companies themselves. We figure out in the methodology what works and what doesn't work, and we make changes in accordance with that. Then what are the benefits for you in taking part? So you've seen the little boxes throughout the presentations kind of explaining how ACT helps you. So hopefully that already gives you a good idea of how it can be useful. But just to kind of recap some of that. So first of all, you do benefit from a free ACT assessment of your company's low carbon strategy. So that kind of external perspective that will help review the strategy and the commitments that you've made. Out of it, you get a feedback report that includes tailored recommendations that kind of show the strengths and the areas of improvement of your strategy in order to align with the goal of the Paris Agreement. It will also be great to kind of benefit from your expertise in order for us to improve the methodology. And if you do have any suggestions, we'll definitely take all of that into account and consider them. And you are welcome to kind of showcase the efforts that you're doing through the feedback report, through the ACT rating, just to show that you are making this effort to reduce your emissions, and you can showcase that to partners and investors. Finally, there's the benefit of learning how the ACT methodology is structured, how it works, the level of detail that it goes into, and there is a possibility to have training, maybe more detailed training on the ACT methodology as well, if you do want to learn more about it. Right, so I quickly talked about the schedule, but just to give you an idea of what the process is like, so starting from September, we'll have a kickoff meeting with the consultants. So we do have a group of consultants that will work as analysts. So you will get support from a dedicated analyst that will help you through the entire process. So they will meet with you, kind of explain the process, the timeline of the program, what is expected, and then support you with the data collection. Once the data collection is done, the analyst will carry out the ACT assessment and then provide you with the tailored feedback and kind of have a meeting to explain the feedback and the results from that assessment. And finally, at the very end, we will have a final meeting with the companies that took part in the road test, as well as kind of all of the people that took part in developing the methodology, just to kind of discuss the, again, what worked, what didn't work, and the lessons learned from the entire methodology development project.
Alice, before you go on, we have We have a question in the Q&A section, so I can read it for you if you want. Will the outcome of the assessment of the participating companies be made publicly available, or will participating companies have the choice to keep it discreet?
Okay, yeah, so we'll talk about it a little bit in more detail in a few slides, but the assessment will be confidential. So the ACT score that you get and the feedback report, that will be only for the company, and it will be kept private. We will use some of the aggregate results from all of the companies in a public report. But yes, just to reiterate, in terms of the ACT assessment of the company and the ACT rating of the company, this will all stay private. And then you can decide if you want to make it public, obviously, but that is fully up to you. I think there's another question that popped up. Right, so there was another question on the data remaining unpublished or published and level of confidentiality. So I think I just answered that, but again, we'll come back to it in a few slides. And then another question, which is, due to the large number of sustainability related ratings and reporting protocols, companies are struggling with keeping up with all of them. What are you doing to minimize the amount of resources needed to complete your assessment? Right, so the first thing that we do, which I mentioned, is we've aligned with the CDP questionnaire. So that means that if you do take part in CDP reporting, we've made sure that the data that you collect and report can be used directly for the ACT assessment. So if you do take part in the road test, you'll be able to input that information directly into the data collection form as it is for most of the questions. Some of them are slightly different sometimes because we do require a slightly different level of detail, but for a lot of it, it is aligned. And we are happy to take all of the information that you have on other kind of reporting or commitments that you've been making, so that will all be taken into account for your assessment. So any kind of public information that you want to share, we can take it and include it in the assessment. I don't know, Jan, if you've got any comments on that. Anything to add?
I think you covered it pretty well. So no, nothing to add.
Perfect. Great. We'll keep moving then. Right, so we just wanted to quickly give you an idea of what previous road tests have looked like. So from what you've seen previously, we have been doing that with a number of sectors. So we have been running different road tests in different sectors with participating companies. So the logos that you can see on the slides are the companies that decided to take part for the road test for the transport, oil and gas, and cement sector. So we had pretty good participation to these. And we also had some feedback as well. So I won't read all of that into detail, but we've had some feedback that we've taken into account when updating the methodologies. We've had feedback that the ACT assessment can be tough, but that overall it was a really useful process and kind of allowed them to have that kind of external perspective on the strategy, and just to kind of recap of strengths and weaknesses and kind of just areas that can be improved, and the tailored recommendations were really appreciated. Okay, so moving on to the outputs, guarantees, and commitments of the project. So first of all, the outputs of the project, as mentioned, you'll get an individual company report that is private and just for the company. There will be a public report of the results of the road test, and again, any information will be used in aggregated format. And finally, a feedback report from the methodology. But I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. So the individual company report or the feedback report. This is an example here which provides you with, this is an example score for a company, 10C equal. And what you can see on the graph is the score for each of the 9 modules of the performance score. So that's just an example of the type of information that you get at the beginning. But obviously, we go into more detail. We've got a lot of indicators. Indicators are specific to the sector. And in that feedback report, we go into a high level of detail in terms of the performance, the narrative, the trend, and why you got the result that you got. Kind of, again, strengths and weaknesses of your company's climate strategy. In terms of the public road test report, so we'll look at overall on the kind of 15 or so companies that have been assessed. We'll only use the data in aggregate, but we just want to get an idea of where the sector is at, and that will be really useful just to present the results of the road test. And finally, we will have a feedback report for the methodology, which will compile the feedback and the suggestions that we've collected throughout the entire process, and that will then allow us to update the methodology and to make sure that we take all of that into account. Right, so in terms of guarantees, so in terms of data confidentiality, which we've had a few questions on, so your company data will remain confidential. Your individual ACT score will remain confidential. There is a possibility of signing a non-disclosure agreement with them and the consultants before you're going to share your data. And again, the final road test report will only use aggregated and anonymized scores. In terms of the training, so you will have a dedicated analyst that is fully trained in the ACT initiative and in that very specific sectoral methodology prior to the road test, and they'll be here and available throughout the project to help you with the data collection and to kind of give you the results afterwards. And there is a possibility of having that full day ACT assessment training if you wish to do that. And again, the entire ACT team will be available if you do have any questions or concerns throughout the project. So these were the guarantees. So we ask for a couple of commitments from companies if they do decide to take part. So what we'll ask from you is that you select a project lead, that you collect the data that is required for the ACT assessment, or at least as much as possible. There is a possibility to kind of, use different data sources or provide estimates. So we'll be able to make recommendations. But yeah, if you can be there to help collect the data, that's what we ask of you. And then we estimate that time that we require is between 5 to 10 working days for the road test, and that includes the data collection process as well as taking part in the meetings. And maybe one thing to mention is that we have seen that companies that do report to CDP can usually spend a bit less time on that data collection because they have a lot of it already readily available. We'll ask that the project lead is actively engaged throughout the process, just to kind of attend meetings and reply to emails and make sure that we only have 6 months to complete that, and the assessments themselves take a lot less time than that. So we just want to make sure that we're able to complete it in the allocated. And finally, we just ask that you agree that CDP and them can communicate about the road test. So that would be, for example, to mention that your company is part of it. Okay, so I did have a poll that I wanted to launch. So there is a question first. So I will we'll answer the question first, and then we can move on to the poll, which I put the question on the slide, but it will be a WebEx poll, so I'll just have to launch that. So the question is, for the road test, how many chemical companies are you considering of type A and type B? That's a very good question. I don't think we've got a set number. And again, this is something that we'll probably have to figure out during the selection process if we do have a large number of companies applying. Because again, we do want to make sure we've got as many kind of diverse products and chemicals that are represented. So yeah, we'll figure it out once we've got the applications.
And it would be interesting for us also to have integrated companies, not only type A, type B, integrated companies, and within the type A companies, if possible, some actors that are dedicated to the production of ammonia, other ones for the production of hydrogen and so on. So yeah, we'll try to make the group as diverse as possible.
Yeah, thanks. Right, and there's another question that popped up. So what is the anticipated approximate resources time from a company's analyst side to go through this road test? Sure, so that's, I'll just go back up. So we estimate between 5 to 10 working days for a single representative from the company. And again, if you do have a lot of data already available, we do expect that the data collection will take less time. Okay, so we've got a very quick poll just to kind of gauge interest and get an idea of what everyone's thinking. So I will just launch that. And we'll give you a couple of minutes. Right, we are very close to the end of the hour and we are nearly done. So I'll keep it open for 30 seconds and then we'll move on to the next steps. Okay. I think if you want to put in your answers, you've got 5 more seconds. Perfect. Thank you very much. Right. So moving on to the next steps, we'll do that quite quickly. If your company would like to participate in the road test, we've got 2 documents to read through, the call for proposals and the terms of reference. They will both be on the ACT website. We're currently updating the website and we'll share that by email just to make sure that you've got the direct links as well. And we'll ask that you complete that and send it back to us by the end of August. And again, we'll share the information on the email address to send it to by email. If you are interested and need more time to fill in the application form, just let us know and we can figure out the best way forward. Great, okay, so that is it for us today. So just to recap, we've got public consultation opening at the end of the week, opening for a month. You're all invited to provide comments. It will be really useful for us to know what you're thinking and whether you got feedback. After that, we'll have the road test open to up to 15 chemical companies, and we'll need to get the application form by the end of August for that. And you've got our contact details on the slide here. All of the information will be available on the ACT website very soon as well. And I know it's the end of the hour, so thank you all very much for joining, for asking a lot of questions, very useful. And yeah, if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch and we'll follow up with an email with all of the updated information as well, so you've got that handy. Thank you all.
Thanks to everybody.